Bonjour à tous les internautes du Monde et du We Love Green Festival. Bienvenue à la dernière session de ce week-end et cette édition 2020 du festival. Je suis Julien Bouissou, je couvre les pays émergents et le commerce mondial au quotidien Le Monde. Et j'accueille aujourd'hui deux invités, Vandana Shiva, qui je crois est à Delhi, en Inde. Hello Vandana Shiva, namasté.
Namaste.
Et Lionel Astruc à Paris. Bonjour Lionel Astruc. Alors, si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas, posez-les dès maintenant sur le live. On les posera à nos invités dans un quart d'heure environ, avec Odile de Place. Alors, Vandana Shiva, vous avez fondé à Dehradun, dans les contreforts de l'Himalaya, une ferme biologique qui est à la fois un centre de formation et un conservatoire de graines vivantes. Vous définissez vous-même comme une éco-féministe. Votre combat, c'est la protection de la biodiversité et l'agroécologie, la lutte contre les semences transgéniques et les produits phytosanitaires. Lionel Astruc, vous êtes journaliste, vous avez écrit plusieurs ouvrages sur la transition écologique et ceux qui l'amènent, notamment Pierre Rabhi, Vandana Shiva, Rob Hopkins. Vous avez aussi enquêté sur les filières de matières premières, la manière dont nos biens de consommation sont produits, les ressources qu'ils utilisent. Et votre dernier ouvrage porte sur la fondation Bill et Melinda Gates et il s'intitule « L'art de la fausse générosité ». Vandana Shiva, rebonjour. D'abord, première question, comment vous portez-vous et comment vous avez vécu le confinement en Inde? Je crois que la pandémie est loin d'être terminée et le nombre de contaminations continue d'augmenter, c'est bien ça?
Unfortunately, someone will need to translate for me.
Sorry, because I thought there was some translation, but I'm going to speak to you in English.
So there isn't. I've just sent a message.
Okay, so first question. First, I mean, how have you been? Are you doing well? Because I think the lockdown was quite tough in India, and the pandemic is far from over, and the number of actual infection is still rising and going up. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, all infections go that way. That's the nature of infections. But
so
the
how did you
lockdown has
experience the
been
lockdown?
very, very strict, and the graph is going like that. And so there's a lot of debate that the lockdown didn't achieve its objective of containing the spread of the virus, but it had a huge impact on the vulnerable, particularly the vulnerable. The large numbers of working people who I have observed over the last 30 years were the displaced peasants, as globalization basically said we're going to shift to an agriculture that's not for feeding people. And they basically were refugees from the villages. And now they've had to go back to their villages. So the economic costs and the social costs and the human costs of the lockdown have been very, very high in India.
Okay. So Vandana, I wanted to ask you, according to you, is this crisis an ecological crisis?
Of course, it's an ecological crisis, because if you look at why are there so many new infectious diseases that are moving from animals in forests to human beings, 300 new infectious diseases in the last 30 years, which is the 30 years of globalization, which is the 30 years of total abuse of all limits of the planet, limits of ecosystems, and joined with it are very wrong calculations. The continued statement that an industrial agriculture which can never, ever be satisfied with the land that it works on, always needs new lands to colonize the Amazon, the Indonesian rainforest, and forests everywhere, that it's productive. Productivity should be a piece of land, should be left in a better state after you have done agriculture. But the second big issue is agriculture is no more about agriculture. Agriculture means care for the land. It is now about investments, returns on investments. It is about commodity production. 90% of the GM soya, which is burning the Amazon, is for biofuel and animal feed. And the subsidies, the taxpayer subsidies, make it work. And then, of course, the big financial giants who've taken over everything including food and agriculture. And that's what I wrote about in my book, Oneness versus the 1%. Both how the billionaires are controlling everything, but how the asset funds of the billionaires, the Vanguards and the BlackRocks, BlackRock walked away with $23 trillion of increased assets from 7 trillion before this crisis. So it is an ecological crisis. And the ecological crisis is related to the fact that we have an economic model that doesn't understand limits and treats the violation of limits as growth. So every metric of agribusiness, every metric of economy is creating conditions, not just for new infectious disease pandemics, but a chronic disease pandemic. And the ecology of our body, an amazing, complex, self-organized living system, has been so abused by industrial food and industrial agriculture that every year 1.9 million people are dying for diabetes. Millions are dying because of cancer. And right in France, the amazing work of Dr. Eric Seralini that showed that Roundup Ready GMO crops are a recipe for tumors. And he was attacked, the WHO was attacked, but the data is clear. Our own government, our minister admitted that 73% of the COVID deaths are not because of COVID, but because of prior chronic diseases. So I say, why don't the health ministers, why don't the WHO address the much larger number of deaths because of a greed-based, disease-creating agriculture and food model? That is what the ecology issue is.
But going back to this agriculture crisis, the population is growing. There'll be very soon 10 billion people living on Earth. So don't you think that we should increase land to be able to feed this population? How do you solve this equation?
Julian, I just mentioned that only 10% of the GMO soya and GMO corn growing from increasing land acreage under agribusiness is going to feed people. But as my work in Navdanya has shown over the 35 years, you can either intensify through toxics and chemicals and invade more ecosystems and produce commodities that don't go to feed people, but they uproot people. And this doesn't produce nourishment, it doesn't produce food, it produces commodities. Commodities going for biofuel is not addressing hunger. And my book, Earth Democracy, I have shown that populations increase because of uprooting and displacement. That's what happened with the Highland clearances in Scotland. That's what happened in India after 1815 when the British grabbed our land to try and extract revenues and rents. So first of all, the assumption that population will be 10 million is assuming you will create instability, because in the state of Kerala, which has totally controlled this epidemic because of public health, because of decentralized governance, they also have a negative population growth. So if we were to follow the Kerala model of how to deal with disease, we will find a way that systems with security for people don't have population increase. But because we are large numbers of people, we need to use less land to grow more nutrition. That's why we calculate health per acre and nutrition per acre. And our research with actual farmers, 200 farmers, their biodiverse fields, is showing that if all of India farmed with biodiversity intensification rather than chemical intensification, we could provide nourishment, not just stuff, not just things that are called food, but real nourishment, iron that could feed 14 billion lactating mothers, vitamin A that could be enough for 1.5 billion Indians. We could feed with every nutrient a healthy diet needs, 2 times India's population. And if we do this across the world, intensified through biodiversity rather than toxics, we will feed everyone. And I'm very glad and I welcome the European initiative of Farm to Fork to move towards biodiversity and at least aim at 50% reduction of pesticides. by 2030. I think it should be 100% reduction of pesticides, because pesticides have no place in agriculture. They're only creating cancer and pushing insects to extinction.
You know, the fact is that the pandemics also affected the whole world, and that's very specific to these pandemics. And the world as such doesn't know any border. So do you think that we should go towards more globalization? And we should open the borders?
Well, the analysis showed so clearly that if it became a global pandemic, it's because there was globalization. First, globalization that invaded into forests and destroyed the ecosystems where other species have a safe habitat. And then the spread of the epidemic was through flights.
But the Earth doesn't know any border. There's no border on Earth. So why do you want to put borders on Earth?
No, the issue is not borders. I think, Julian, you must distinguish between ecological limits, which are a law of the Earth, and borders, which are geographical borders. And yes, in the last few decades, we've created national borders. You know, even European countries are very little children when it comes to their birth. How old is America? These are all new borders. All of the African borders were created by colonialism. All of the Middle East borders were created for oil. So they're recent geographical borders, but they're ecological limits of every ecosystem. And all the research is showing that the more we localize our food systems because of the ecological laws, the more food we produce, the less disease we create, the more livelihoods we have, and we have more robust, resilient economies that can deal both with climate shocks as well as economic shocks of the kind that the pandemic lockdown has imposed on the world.
Thank you. Let me turn to Lionel for 2 minutes in French, and then we'll get back to you with questions from the internet users. Lionel, alors, parce qu'on entend souvent une critique au sujet de l'agroécologie, c'est que justement, on ne pourra pas nourrir la population, la planète. Qu'est-ce qu'il en est en France? Est-ce qu'on a des exploitations, suffisamment d'exploitations justement en France?
Non, il n'y a pas suffisamment d'exploitation en France pour nourrir, enfin en tout cas d'exploitation en agroécologie en France. Mais pour reprendre ce qu'était en train de dire Vandana, je crois qu'elle a vraiment raison. Ce que le Covid vient de nous montrer, les écologistes le disent depuis très longtemps, mais on a vraiment besoin de relocaliser notre agriculture, de passer à une agriculture qui soit plus diversifiée, qui soit plus écologique, de passer donc à l'agroécologie. Et en fait, en France, pour répondre à votre question, il y a un mouvement de micro-fermes qui est en pleine croissance, en plein développement. Pour vous donner un chiffre, en fait, 25% des installations aujourd'hui se font sous des modèles approchant ce modèle des micro-fermes. Et il y a plus largement en fait un mouvement de citoyens qui, voyant que l'État ne fait rien ou si peu pour relocaliser son agriculture, en fait, se disent on va le faire nous-mêmes, on va le faire seul ou on va le faire à plusieurs. Et ce mouvement, il est vraiment très intéressant parce qu'il ramène la résilience sur les territoires. Et c'est vrai que pour faire face à l'empilement de crises auxquelles on est en train de se confronter, on a vraiment besoin de cette relocalisation qui ramène les emplois sur le sol, qui évite. On est dans une économie extractive aujourd'hui. Et garder la valeur ajoutée sur les territoires, c'est notamment cultiver ce qu'on va manger. La France est vraiment au fond du classement, est vraiment dernière de classe dans ce domaine-là. C'est très dommage parce qu'elle a de bonnes terres, un bon climat, une grande diversité. Or, en 10 ans, on s'aperçoit que les importations alimentaires ont été multipliées par 2. Donc, je crois que ce mouvement de micro-fermes, ce mouvement de l'agroécologie, qui passe sous les radars, malheureusement, sous les radars médiatiques. Aujourd'hui, il faut mettre le projecteur sur ce mouvement. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, donc encore une fois, ce n'est pas l'État qui aide ce mouvement, qui est pourtant un mouvement innovant et très intéressant, qui nous amène de vraies solutions. Ce n'est pas l'État qui aide ce mouvement, c'est un réseau d'associations l'association Terre de Liens, l'association Sol, que Vandana Shiva connaît très bien, et le mouvement Colibri, dont je voudrais souligner la pertinence du travail depuis des années, justement, pour aider tous ces citoyens qui, en dépit de ce manque de soutien, essayent de créer des initiatives locales sur les territoires. Aujourd'hui, Colibri recense 600 de ces groupes de citoyens qui essaient de se mobiliser. Je crois que c'est dans ce sens-là aujourd'hui qu'il faut aller, et peut-être aussi que l'agroécologie change d'échelle, parce que c'est vrai que ces micro-fermes, il faut qu'elles se multiplient, il faut aussi qu'elles arrivent à devenir peut-être un peu plus grosses pour produire davantage, mais tout en gardant cette logique d'une vraie agroécologie, c'est-à-dire une agroécologie biologique, parce qu'on voit que les mots sont récupérés par l'industrie et détournés de leur sens premier. Et donc, encore une fois, ce mouvement Colibri apporte les outils pour pouvoir développer ces nouveaux systèmes, des outils qui aident les citoyens, et pour faire en sorte que demain, les territoires deviennent vraiment des territoires d'expérimentation de cette relocalisation de l'agriculture.
Merci Lionel. Thank you Lionel. So now, let me turn to Odile. On va prendre les questions des internautes. C'est difficile de jongler entre le français et l'anglais. Vandana, I'm so sorry, we are between French and English. So I'll try my best, to speak in English to you. And so now we'll take some questions from internet, and Odile will take them.
Yes, hello everybody, and don't hesitate to ask your question in French, en français ou en anglais, on fera les traductions. I have a question from Ines, and she's wondering, what do you think of the urban agriculture? Is it only awareness or a real possibility for the future?
Is it for me or Lionel?
Both of you. Lionel, okay. Est-ce que vous voulez que je la traduise en français ou...
Non, j'ai compris.
Ok.
Je vais faire une réponse courte parce que peut-être que Vandana a quelque chose à dire sur cette question. En fait, l'agriculture urbaine, elle a à mon avis deux objectifs. L'objectif de production, finalement, c'est un objectif moindre, à savoir que on ne pourra pas produire de grandes quantités de végétaux, on ne pourra pas faire beaucoup d'élevage et de production agricole dans les centres-villes, ça semble évident, mais en revanche, c'est très important qu'elle soit là, cette agriculture urbaine, d'abord pour revégétaliser les centres-villes et faire revenir la nature dans les villes, et ensuite parce que c'est un outil de sensibilisation qui est vraiment important pour rappeler à chacun que la résilience à l'échelle des territoires, eh bien, ça vient d'une agriculture vivante. Mais je crois que l'agriculture qui est autour des villes aujourd'hui a un rôle stratégique beaucoup plus important à jouer pour notre souveraineté alimentaire.
Merci. Vandana, about urban agriculture, do you think it's a real possibility?
So, we always had a continuum of food production and agriculture. And cities were surrounded by farms that provided them. I have visited cities with 500-year traditions, 800-year traditions, where farmers were given allotment to provide the vegetables for the cities. This was ruptured, and it's been called the metabolic rift between the country and the city with the arrival of chemical fertilizers. And the interesting thing is, it is founder of the chemistry of soil who said this rupture is the most serious thing in the world. Every city should have its surrounding system. And I'm very happy that before the COP in 2015 in Paris, I worked with AMAP to create a greater Paris region for organic food to be supplied to the city. These are totally doable systems. And yes, every city should have food in gardens, should have food in balconies, should have food in terraces. And again, I remember at the 2015 COP, a new urban planning law was passed that people would have to grow gardens on their terraces. But there is another kind of urban agriculture which takes you further down the road of more energy intensity and more nutrition emptiness. And these are trying to build high rises with artificial light, no soil, to produce vegetables. They look like vegetables just as much as the wheat you eat from chemical farming looks like wheat, but it has no nutrition, and instead it gives you gluten allergies. So the look of the food is not enough to tell you whether it is food with all the nourishment. We know the ecology of food tells us that the nourishment in food comes from the soil. Albert Howard wrote a book, Health is a Continuum from the soil to the plants to animals, including humans as animals. The soil creates micronutrients. In these high-rise urban agriculture systems, the nutrients that are put artificially is the nutrients available to the plant. And the two things I have always asked those who promote it is give me the energy audit. Because if industrial agriculture took 10 units of energy to produce 1 unit of food, industrial factory farming takes 100 units of energy to produce 1 unit of food, this kind of system will probably take 1,000 units of energy to produce 1 unit of food at a time where energy use is the problem of climate change, including the fact that even when we shift to renewables, they still have a very heavy ecological footprint in terms of mining, materials, etc. To increase inefficient energy production is not right. It increases entropy. Ecological farming, agroecology, uses 1 unit of input to produce 10 units of healthy, nourishing food full of all the nutrients. The second thing that the people who promote high-rise agriculture with no sun, no soil, no light, is the nutrition issue. I said, give me the nutrition. If chemical farming gave us nutritionally empty food, what will this kind of industrial urban farming? And it's extremely important to recognize at this point, especially in a program like We Love Green, that, you know, Amazon, which became richer by 34 billion during the lockdown, has bought Whole Foods in America. And now it is growing these high-rise urban production systems to supply whole food. And they're saying we've got to become free of farmers. Monsanto, Bayer, Bill Gates are talking about farming without farmers and digital agriculture. And then they're investing in using GMO seeds to do factory farming modification with GMO yeast, GMO enzymes. This system is a recipe for a health disaster. I would suggest that all these fake foods be subjected to all the biosafety regulations and all the public health regulations that all GMOs are subjected to, because they are GMO foods.
Thank you. Pour ceux qui viennent de nous rejoindre, profitez-en si vous voulez poser des questions. C'est le dernier échange du think tank Le Monde We Love Green Festival. Donc, posez vos questions sur le Facebook Live. Et Odile, est-ce qu'on a d'autres questions?
Yes, I have a question from Genia Golubeva. Vandana, do you think we can change the current status of environmental affairs? Can just citizens change something, or it's for the politician to bring the change? Thank you.
Well, all of us have watched how over the last 20 years, with globalization, politics underwent a massive genetic modification. And it's not an accident that everywhere democracies were hijacked by the 1%. And I've written about it in my book. So if you want politicians who sing the tunes of the 1% to bring change to protect the planet, which they are destroying, it's a wrong place to begin. Of course, we shouldn't give up on representative elections. But the place to begin is communities working with local governments, as in France they have done, to ban glyphosate by the mayors of small towns. That is where there is accountability. And all democracy builds from the ground up. For a while, it's been hijacked to be from the top down. This is the reason we cannot delegate our powers. We have to exercise our powers. And that to me is participatory democracy. That to me is what Gandhi called Swaraj, living your freedom every day and working with institutions to shift them. And most importantly, to really create accountability for big money, big ag, big tech, big pharma. They are out of control.
Vandana, can I ask you a question about, you talk a lot about violence against
Yes.
Earth also, but nature is also very violent. Epidemics, cyclones, earthquakes, nature kills lots of people. So don't you think we need science to protect ourselves against nature?
So you mentioned the pandemics. As I mentioned, it's man-made. If we hadn't invaded into the forest, we wouldn't have Ebola, we wouldn't have MERS, we wouldn't have Nile virus, we wouldn't have Nipah virus, we wouldn't have any of those. It's
But there were epidemics 8
invasion
centuries
into
ago.
forest. So
But there
it
were
is not
epidemics.
nature acting, it's an anthropogenic system. Climate change, that's what IPCC gets tired repeating every year in its reports. It's an anthropogenic impact. This is not nature acting. Nature's capacity is to regulate her climate. That's why she's called Gaia. That's what the NASA scientist James Lovelock found. Yes, we need to understand the laws of Gaia. That is ecological science. But there is an abusive bioscience of the kind that attacked Eric Bandini. That's not science. And just today, there's been a leak that even Horton of the Lancet was pressurized by Big Pharma to try and delegitimize other therapies. And he says their power is so intense. So science is not one uniform thing. There are many, many sciences, and there are many, many actors. And when science gets married to making money, it stops being seeking of knowledge. It reduces itself to propaganda. Science is the seeking of truth. Science is working in harmony with the laws of the earth. And these laws are the ecological laws.
Thank you. I have another question from Eleanor. What do you think about technologies? Lionel, vous pouvez aussi bien sûr répondre. What do you think about technologies being developed for carbon capture storage and geoengineering? Sorry.
Alors, je vais faire une réponse courte parce que je suis sûr que Vandana a beaucoup de choses à dire là-dessus. Je viens d'écrire un livre sur la fondation Bill et Melinda Gates qui notamment soutient la géo-ingénierie, mais de manière globale, pour répondre aussi à la première partie de cette question, est en fait obsédé par toutes les solutions technologiques et pense que finalement apporter des solutions technologiques qui forcément sont produites et vendues par des multinationales, faire descendre de manière verticale ces solutions technologiques sur des populations pauvres à qui elles sont quasiment finalement imposées, eh bien, ce serait la solution à tous nos problèmes. Ça pose un vrai problème parce que d'abord, donc, on voit bien que on prétend en fait résoudre un problème avec les mêmes outils qui ont causé ce problème, c'est-à-dire les multinationales. Ça, c'est la première chose. Et puis, la deuxième, c'est que finalement, il n'y a pas de remise en question des inégalités, il n'y a pas de remise en question du paradigme dans lequel nous vivons, il n'y a pas de remise en question des paradis fiscaux, et que finalement, ces solutions n'en sont pas. Et donc, je crois que la géo-ingénierie, c'est vraiment jouer avec les lois de la nature de manière ultra dangereuse. Et aujourd'hui, Bill Gates est vraiment le porte-drapeau de toutes ces fausses solutions qui nous emmènent vraiment dans le mur et le plus souvent, en plus, derrière ce prétexte de philanthropie et qui, en fait, brouille complètement les pistes. Alors, il y a eu beaucoup de fake news ces dernières semaines sur cette question. Et c'est dommage parce que ça sert, en fait, ça sert ce système et ça cache, en fait, beaucoup de vraies informations qui sont vérifiées, recoupées et qui montrent à quel point cette fondation, en fait, nuit aujourd'hui à la recherche de solutions, que ce soit pour l'environnement, en particulier, mais aussi la santé, etc.
Oui, parce que pour être très clair, on n'est pas du tout, ce que vous dites n'est pas du tout ce qu'on a pu lire effectivement, des espèces de discussions sans fin sur un virus, des puces dans le vaccin. Enfin voilà, on n'est absolument pas là-dedans que les choses
non,
soient
pas du tout. Non. Et c'est pour ça que c'est pour ça que je le mentionne, parce que je crois qu'aujourd'hui, les gens qui relaient ces fausses informations sont les idiots utiles de Bill Gates et lui rendent service. Il y a un vrai problème avec la fondation Bill Gates, notamment parce que l'argent qui sert cette fondation n'est pas directement l'argent de Bill et Melinda Gates, c'est un argent qui passe par le trust de la fondation Bill et Melinda Gates qui, lui, finance l'industrie de l'armement, les industries fossiles, les OGM, la malbouffe avec McDonald's, etc. Et donc, c'est un vrai système, un vrai mécano qui, du coup, est complexe, difficile à comprendre. Et c'est pour ça que l'information a du mal à aller jusqu'au grand public. Et c'est pour ça qu'aujourd'hui encore, on parle toujours de Bill Gates comme un grand philanthrope, etc. Non, il finance, encore une fois, l'industrie de l'armement, les industries fossiles, etc. Et ça n'est que la partie investissement. Lorsqu'on arrive dans la partie dons, eh bien, on reprend les mêmes secteurs et en particulier, voilà, les OGM, etc. Et il y a masse de conflits d'intérêts dans ce système. Donc, je crois que cette obsession, cette croyance dans la solution technologique, elle est vraiment néfaste. Et le problème de cette fondation et le problème de ces solutions, lorsqu'on les présente vraiment comme des solutions à tous les problèmes de la planète, c'est que elles ne font pas confiance dans les solutions naturelles. Elles ne font pas confiance dans l'agroécologie, elles ne font pas confiance dans les médecines naturelles, etc. C'est un vrai problème.
Et Lionel, malheureusement, Bill et Melinda Gates ne sont pas là pour vous répondre. Donc, je suis quand même obligé de vous poser la question, parce que c'est des allégations quand même assez importantes. Quand vous dites qu'ils financent l'industrie de l'armement, c'est quoi exactement? Vous pensez à quelles entreprises exactement? Quelle prise de participation?
Alors, je vous renvoie d'abord à mon livre, L'art de la fausse générosité. Et donc, dedans, vous allez trouver toutes les sources de ces informations. Mais pour être précis, le trust, donc un trust, c'est un fonds d'investissement. Et le fonds d'investissement qui alimente la fondation Bill et Melinda Gates finance une entreprise qui s'appelle BAE Systems, qui est un fleuron britannique de l'armement. Mais des exemples, il y en a plein. Je veux dire, ce fonds d'investissement finance à des parts des centaines de millions de parts. En tout cas, en 2014, c'était encore le cas enfin des centaines de millions de dollars d'actions chez Coca-Cola, McDonald's, British Petroleum, etc., etc. Monsanto est à la fois dans le portefeuille de ce fonds d'investissement et fait partie des bénéficiaires de la fondation. Donc, on voit qu'avec ces dons, en fait, la fondation, alimente la croissance de ces entreprises qui pourtant sont nuisibles. Donc non, il y a un vrai problème objectif avec cette fondation et avec ce tout technologique qui était un petit peu l'objet de la question d'Odile. Et donc je pense que c'est vraiment important de le dire parce que beaucoup de gens en fait ont une sorte de tabou avec cette fondation en disant oh là là mais il donne tellement d'argent. Alors d'abord c'est pas vraiment son argent qu'il donne. La preuve c'est qu'il s'est enrichi depuis les années 2000, sa fortune n'a fait qu'augmenter, elle vient de dépasser les 100 milliards de dollars, donc il n'est pas du tout en train de se dépouiller au profit des pauvres, ça n'est pas ça. Et donc je pense que c'est quand même important de remettre un petit peu les choses à leur place. Ça n'est pas le grand philanthrope que l'on décrit, quoi.
D'accord. Let's go back to the technologies ou Odile, s'il y a d'autres questions des internautes.
Yes, I have a new question. I have a question. from...
You can ask, by the way,
hard
vous
to
pouvez poser des
consider.
questions en anglais, en français et même en hindi. Si vraiment il y a des internautes qui, qui veulent poser des
Bien,
questions
on
en
pourra,
hindi,
voilà.
on pourra trouver la traduction. Donc, n'hésitez pas, c'est le moment de poser des questions. Il nous reste 10 minutes avant la fin de cette session.
On a beaucoup de questions en fait sur l'autosuffisance alimentaire. Do you think schools should grow their own food? And do you have example of school being completely self-sufficient on its food? Vandana.
Well, I think schools should grow food and have what we call in India gardens of hope, not only because it is good to get fresh food, but also because growing a garden is the highest learning and highest education. It nourishes the multiple intelligences in a child. It is now recognized that we don't have one linear intelligence, and IQ was a mismeasure. That we need all the intelligence. We need our hearts and our heads and our hands to work together. And the work in the garden is the education to be a human being on this earth. I know examples where schools are able to grow enough for their midday meal schemes because most of the schools just need one meal. I know across United States, edible schoolyards have grown. So it's a question of how much we intend to make this shift. Most importantly, during the wars, half the food used to come from urban gardens, including schools and institutions and churches. So it is time again to make gardening and growing food the highest vocation, rather than something that some people would like to see disappear. This is the revolution of our times. This is the resistance of our times, to say we will not be subjected to more poisons. We will not be subjected to fake food and impossible burger with 14 patents so you can make more money by poisoning us. It is time to wake up to our species being, our biological being, our ecological being, and realizing that the growing of food is the highest act, but eating nourishing food is vital to our health.
Thank you. I have another question from Bintu. I think I know the answer for the first part of the question, but what do you think of the land grabbing by multinationals to the detriment of the family farmers? And what prospects after COVID-19? And how does women farmers intend to continue? I think women farmers is a subject that you talk about regularly.
Okay, so most farming is done by women, and I did a report way back for the FAO. They wanted me to look at women in agriculture, and I realized most farmers are women, except that the ads always have a man on a tractor or a man spraying poisons in a field. So most farmers are women, and even as industrial agriculture is growing, in spite of that, organic farms are growing, and women as organic farmers are growing, including women who weren't farmers. I have worked with women who were software engineers, bank managers, who chose to become farmers with the consciousness that this is the most important work to do. Now, why are small farmers losing their land by the land grab of industrial agriculture? Because of a trick played in the measurement of productivity. Productivity, honestly, is output per unit input, in which case industrial systems with high inputs of capital, of chemicals, of fossil fuels would be negative economies. And they also don't produce an output that is real food that nourishes us. But output is only measured as the commodity that goes to the market without distinguishing what its use is for. And input has become human beings. The farmer becomes an input. No, the farmer is a caretaker of the land, a steward, a custodian of the land. They're co-creators with the earth. Farmers and rural communities and healthy communities should be an outcome of good farming rather than human beings as inputs. So the calculus was worked out, manipulated in order to promote industrialism in every sector and industrial agriculture in our food. We just have to make an honest, true cost accounting and not treat farmers as inputs, but treat them as the main agents, and the main agency will get an economics that recognizes that farmers are needed on the land to take care of the land. Agriculture must go back to its root, the culture of the care for the land, that farmers can do, poison sprays cannot.
Thank you. I have another question from Nicolas Graillot. And can you tell us if conflicts of interest seems to you to be the cancer of our societies, and to identify the cause of the causes of the causes of the problem on the solution? Nicolas is asking if the solution is not constitutional because of the conflicts of interest to find the solution.
Well, I definitely think, who all the amazing people who wrote the constitutions of our different countries have given us the template for how to run democracies, how to defend people's rights, how to protect justice and freedom. So the violation of the Constitution is definitely at the heart of both the violence against the earth and violence against human beings. So I agree that constitutional defense, including identifying the conflicts of interests that are pervasive right now.
Just to, I'm going to ask you the same question as Stefan asked the previous session. Vandana, Lionel, are you optimistic about the future? Because a new generation is coming up. We've seen that with Greta Thunberg. So are you optimistic about the coming years?
Alors, si je peux répondre avant que Vandana donne sa réponse. C'est vraiment difficile de répondre à cette question, mais je crois que pour y répondre d'une manière précise, en fait, il faudrait qu'on soit confronté au vrai diagnostic. Et le problème, c'est qu'on s'illusionne en fait beaucoup d'une sortie possible de cet empilement de crise. Et on évoque beaucoup cette sortie de crise sans réellement savoir si en fait c'est possible. Et donc je crois que aujourd'hui il y a toute cette analyse d'un effondrement en cours, et qui est finalement indéniable, effondrement de la biodiversité, notamment des ressources, etc. Et avoir de faux espoirs, ça n'est pas aller dans la bonne direction. Pour reprendre une comparaison, je dirais que si vous arriviez chez un médecin avec un cancer et qu'on vous dit que vous avez un rhume et que du coup vous essayez de résoudre un problème à l'échelle d'un rhume plutôt qu'à l'échelle d'un cancer, vous iriez dans la mauvaise direction. Donc je crois qu'aujourd'hui, pour devenir optimiste, pour répondre à votre question, il faudrait qu'on apporte des solutions qui sont à l'échelle du problème, et pour l'instant, ça n'est pas le cas.
I believe that hope and fearlessness and optimism are cultivated just as much as fear and hate are cultivated, not from within people, but that has become the currency of how we are being governed right now. Spreading of fear, spreading of hate, and spreading of powerlessness. I cultivate hope with consciousness. Every seed I save, every farmer I work with, every child we work on a garden with, for me is a cultivation of hope. So I have hope. But because I'm trained in quantum theory, I also realize that these predictive behavior lines that the big tech giants are creating for themselves, that a little trigger can bring their edifice down. Look at who would have predicted that in America during lockdown, the killing of one black man, George Floyd, could trigger movements and courage to protest all over the world, including in Paris. We don't know who will be the next George Floyd. We don't know which virus will be the next virus. But uncertainty and unpredictability is the nature of nature. And therefore, excessive certainty and excessive predictability and excessive control for excessive greed is an edifice that will collapse.
Vandana, I have another question from Jean-Baptiste Lemercier. And he says, I only have 2 years of activism behind me. How has Vandana kept hope after all these years of struggle?
First, I never do anything that my conscience and my seeking of truth doesn't guide me to. So I work according to my conscience. And when you work according to your conscience, you never get depleted. But even more important, when you work according to your conscience, no matter what the bullying, no matter what the threats, and I have been bullied enough, like Eric Seralini, by the Monsantos of the world, it doesn't affect you because your conscience is your guide. Their power is not.
Thank you, Vandana.
Merci, Vandana. Thank you, Lionel. Vandana, are you in New Delhi or?
No, I'm locked down, fortunately, in Dehradun, in my ancestral home, my parents' home, where I grew up as a child. And I'm sitting in my mother's cow shed, which she handed to me and said, start the research foundation. So this is where 40 years ago, I started the Research Foundation for Science, Technology and Ecology. And it's very good to be home.
But it's better to be in Dehradun.
Yeah, better than Delhi any day.
Yeah. At least you have some fresh air close to the Himalayas. Thank you so much,
Vandana. Thank you very much, Julian.
Merci,
you.
Lionel.
Nice to see you, Lana.
Merci. C'est la fin de ce live et donc des sessions organisées par Le Monde et We Love Green Festival. Merci à tous les invités. Il y avait Aurélien Barraud, Glenn Albrecht, François Gabard, Bertrand Badré, François Gemène, Arthur Bouvard, Jules Giroda, Lionel Astruc et Vandana Shiva. Et donc, j'espère à l'année prochaine, cette fois-ci peut-être en plein air et sous le soleil, pour une nouvelle édition consacrée à l'environnement.
Merci Julien, et oui, et peut-être même qu'avant l'année prochaine, nous réussirons à nous retrouver puisque voilà, c'était notre première session du Think Tank Live. Nous espérons en avoir une en physique l'année prochaine, mais nous en referons sûrement d'autres. Donc, nous vous tenons au courant sur nos réseaux sociaux respectifs. Merci encore Vandana, merci Lionel et merci à toute l'équipe d'avoir participé à ces échanges.